Curious about the Terraform Authoring and Operations Professional exam? Well, I talked to somebody today who's written a study guide. What's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, nedinthecloud.com, and welcome to another Terraform Tuesday. Today, we have a very special guest. Mattias Fjellström is a cloud architect and a fellow HashiCorp ambassador, and he has taken the time to write a study guide for the Terraform Authoring and Operations Professional exam, and he self-published it on LeanPub. So I have him on today to talk about that and a lot more. Please enjoy this episode with Mattias Fjellström. Well, hey, Matthias, thank you so much for being on Terraform Tuesday. I'm excited to have you here. This is actually our second attempt at this because I screwed up the audio. So thank you for reappearing. Before we get into it, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background vis-a-vis Terraform?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me again. So my name is Matias Fjellström. I know you have problems with my last name. It's Fjellström. It's very
Do my
Swedish.
best.
So I'm working as a cloud architect consultant. I'm based in Gothenburg in Sweden, but I'm also a HashiCorp ambassador. And yeah, as you are as well, and many of our mutual friends.
Yeah.
So I share a lot of like HashiCorp content on my blog, Matias.engineer. That's my primary source of sharing information. And I guess my second source is this new book I've written. So it's the first book I've ever written. So it's been a
Yeah.
good experience. Yeah.
And I definitely want to touch on that. But first, I want to get a little background about how you were introduced to Terraform and how you started to adopt it.
Yeah. So I guess the first time I ever heard about Terraform was back in 2017. I was working for a company that they were quite early in their cloud journey.
Mhm.
They were working with AWS. They were using Terraform, but actually they had written like their own wrapper around Terraform, like a Python wrapper around it. I didn't even know that Terraform was used underneath. So that sort of popped out later when I actually started digging into the code and what was going on. So I guess they had sort of an idea that they wanted to present a unified experience for all their developers, like this Python front end in front of Terraform, and they could maybe change whatever was running underneath at some point without affecting the end user. But yeah, I think it was a bit crazy when I
Yeah.
realized how it worked. It was a bit crazy.
Hmm.
But that was my first experience with Terraform, and after that, I've been using it back and forth for 7 years or 7 or 8 years now.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I mean 2017, that was very early on in Terraform's journey. So I could see why they might want to build a wrapper or something around it in case Terraform didn't pan out. They could switch out to some other IAC option, but
Yeah,
looks like they probably stuck with Terraform because it's been, moderately successful.
yeah, exactly.
So the book that you wrote is about the Terraform professional level exam. I think it's called Terraform Authoring and Operations Professional, which is
Yeah,
quite a
exactly.
mouthful. Um, let's start with that. What is the Pro Cert and how does it fit with the existing Terraform Associate Cert?
Yeah, so if we begin with the associate level certification, that's sort of a introductory level. It's more about understanding the concepts around Terraform, understanding what types of workflows are involved, as well as learning about the different CLI commands with Terraform and a little bit about how to write Terraform templates. The certification exam in that case is based around multiple choice questions as well as a few fill in the blanks type of
Mhm.
questions. So the professional certification, then the major difference is the format of the exam. So in the professional certification, you will actually be using Terraform. So you will be placed inside of this virtual environment, and you need to solve actual problems using Terraform. So that involves using the CLI, writing Terraform code, HCL, performing these types of workflows that you encounter when you're using Terraform.
Hmm. And because it's a live environment, it obviously has to interact with some cloud provider. So right today, it's just AWS, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So I mostly I think when you're using Terraform, like in 95 or more percent of the cases, you're targeting some public cloud provider, right? So
Right.
AWS is the number one player still, so that's why they HashiCorp started with the AWS provider. So um, or yeah, mostly or in the future, you will probably have versions for Azure because that's the second biggest today, and then GCP and maybe some other provider in the future.
Yeah,
But to start with, it's AWS. Yeah.
I have it on good authority that the next target is Azure because they
Ah,
know that's
great.
right
Mm,
behind AWS in terms of
yeah.
popularity.
Yeah.
What kind of person, skill level would you recommend taking the professional level of the exam? Like, how much experience should they have?
Well, the more the better, I would say. But you need to have used Terraform for a while, so you need to be comfortable. Like if you're given a Terraform configuration that you haven't seen before, you need to be comfortable. Like how would you start understanding that Terraform template and what it's doing and so on. So you need to be quite familiar with all of the language syntax, and hopefully you're also familiar with the AWS provider because otherwise it's going to be a problem during the exam. So I don't know, experience wise, a few years, I would say. But then I don't want to be the guy saying like, oh, you need 10 years experience Terraform. I mean,
Right,
you can do it with just a few months of intense usage, I guess. Depends on what type of environments you're working in, really. But
mhm.
in general, a few years of experience would be great.
How would you compare it to other lab-based exams? I'm thinking about, like, the Certified Kubernetes Administrator or Application Developer. Is it similar in nature to that?
Yeah, so I've done the certified developer, or certified Kubernetes application developer, it's called.
Right.
And it's sort of similar. So you're solving actual problems using like Terraform for the Terraform certification and Kubernetes for the Kubernetes certification. But I think there is a difference in the types of problems, like the length of the problems. So in Terraform, I think the scenarios are sort of more involved. So you have
Mm,
you need to perform a number of steps for this one scenario before you're done. While in the Kubernetes certifications, I believe the problems are a bit shorter. So it's more like focused on this one specific task. Like you have this problem, do this, and then you move on to the next problem.
mhm.
So then, of course, the number of problems for the Terraform certification is a bit less because the problems are bigger in scope. While for the Kubernetes exam, I guess, yeah, the problems, since they are shorter, there are more of them.
Right. That was my experience with taking the certified Kubernetes administrator exam is each scenario was much shorter because it was a very small task you were trying to accomplish, but there were
Yeah.
a lot of them,
Yeah.
and I did not manage to finish all of them. I also didn't pass, but that's a story for another time. What type of tasks I know you can't say exactly what the tasks are,
Yeah.
right? That's NDA, but what type of tasks would you expect to find if you were taking the exam?
So a few of the tasks you should like think about is things you don't normally do every day using Terraform. So most likely when you're using Terraform in your daily work, you're writing some code, you're adding resources, adding data sources, and you're applying your configuration. And
Mhm,
then you're done for the day. But there are a few operations which are important to know, but you might not do them every day unless you're like a consultant working with Terraform. Uh,
yeah,
So it can involve things like migrating your state files. So you're changing backend. Maybe you have been using AWS S3 as your state backend, and now you want to move it to use HCP Terraform, for instance.
mhm.
So that kind of things, and also like refactoring a large configuration. Perhaps you started out with a root configuration, and now it's grown to a certain size, and you need to start thinking about how to split it up into different modules.
Hmm.
So those types of tasks, they are quite a bit more challenging than your everyday Terraform usage. So I think you need to think about those tasks and practice on how to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, another one that I know is part of it is the ability to import existing resources. So
Yeah,
understanding one of the two workflows that exists for importing resources and being able to do that successfully.
yeah,
Um, Trying to think if there's anything else that jumped out at me when I was going through it because I've taken it as well. But that's the other big one is understanding importing. It really is. I mean, they say it's about authoring, so writing the code and operations, common things that someone who's deeply immersed in Terraform would need to do. Like you said, on a not so regular basis, but every once in a while, you would have to perform these functions. So they're really looking
yeah,
to test your ability. And there's some troubleshooting in there too, being able to take a configuration that has problems
yeah,
and
exactly.
figuring out what those problems are. Now, within the test environment, you have access to more than just the CLI, right?
Yeah, so you have access to the documentation, for instance. So you have links provided to relevant documentation.
Hmm.
Um, so you can read about anything you need to do. You can read about it. So it helps if you're like familiar with the documentation before you go into the exam, of course.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Um, yeah. And you also have access to the AWS console, of course. So if you need to check something with what you're doing in AWS, you can just go in and
Hmm.
look at your resources. Or if you need to import something, you can find the IDs of your resources in there and so on.
Right. And if I believe that the AWS CLI is also available. So if you know the CLI, you can use that to get information too.
Yeah. So it helps if you've been using AWS, then you might be familiar with all the details around the CLI. But if not, you should spend some time understanding how the CLI authenticates, like when you're using the AWS CLI,
Mm.
how it stores its credentials and so on. So you know how Terraform can pick these credentials up. So there are a few different ways of how this works.
All right. So we've covered some of the things that are in the exam. You looked at that, you looked at the objectives and you thought to yourself, I'm going to write a study guide.
Yeah.
Is that the genesis? How did you decide to write the study guide for this exam?
So it actually started in the spring, let's move back even further. So in HashiConf 2023 in San Francisco, I know you and a few of us ambassadors. We did the alpha testing of this certification.
Yeah.
So I had enormous problems, like struggling with my Swedish keyboard, and I couldn't understand where I find all the symbols I needed to write Terraform code.
Hmm.
Um, so I had a lot of problems there, but it got me thinking later on, like, okay, maybe I should write. I want to write something about this certification, like help people prepare for it. So I actually started writing a blog series, on my blog. I had previously written a similar series for the associate level certification. So now I just wanted to continue doing that for the professional level certification.
Hmm.
Um, but after a while, I realized that the the format wasn't really like blog material because nobody wants to read like a 40,000 character long blog post,
Yeah.
and yeah, nobody would find it even. So I realized a book would be a better format in this case.
Hmm.
Um, but then I put it on hold during the summer. But then in the beginning of August, I thought, okay, today is the day. I just sat down and started writing my book. I had two chapters already from that I had written for my blog, so I got started pretty quickly. But yeah, then I just sat down and I've been writing. I wrote for like 2 months, nonstop, basically, and I published the book now in the beginning of October.
Oh, that's great. And as someone who's written a similar study guide, I did that for the associate level. I know the level of work that goes into writing that study
Yeah,
guide.
yeah,
Like 2 months is no joke. It I think my study guide took me about 4 months to
yeah.
write after work and
Yeah.
at I think I was at a basketball game for my daughter once, and I was typing away about Terraform, you know,
Yeah.
is what happened. Um, so you have the book, which is fantastic. I have purchased it, and I've got to say, it's very well put together. It's a good read, great
Right.
resource. Are there any other resources or materials you would suggest people use to prepare for the exam?
Yeah. So since it's a lab-based exam, of course, a book can only get you so far. So
Mm,
you need to get your hands dirty. And the best way, of course, is just using Terraform in your daily work. Um, if that's not possible, then I suggest starting with the official tutorials, the HashiCorp documentation.
mhm.
And so that's a great place just to try out all the different workflows and CLI commands and everything you will encounter in the exam.
Yeah, that was I run through some of those, I guess it's learn.hashicorp.com might be
Yeah,
we'll include it
yeah,
down in the description, but yeah, they have really good tutorials now. The education team over there has worked hard to build, good resources just directly on the site, so you can augment that with the book.
yeah.
Cool. So we talked about the book a lot. Where can people go find this book?
Yeah, so it's available on LeanPub. Um, it's only available in digital format today, so you can get it in PDF and EPUB format. Um, yeah, so you will provide a link, I hope.
Yes, we'll include the link, absolutely, and, yeah, as someone who's published on LeanPub, I really like it, so,
Yeah,
uh, definitely that I understand why you chose that publishing platform out of all of them.
yeah,
Cool.
it's very easy to work with. So I have the I'm writing in Markdown,
Mhm.
which is like a very good format for writing technical books, I think.
Yeah.
So I have my source code in GitHub, and I just yeah, commit my code and click on a generate new version, and then the version pops up. Yeah,
Yeah, it's very nice. As someone who's written books, for other publishers where they use Microsoft Word,
oh
that's an
yeah,
absolute nightmare. So Markdown's like,
yeah,
"Can we just do everything in Markdown, please?"
yeah. I actually did. I won't mention any names or anything, but I did. I worked as a technical reviewer for a book recently, and the format was Word documents, and I just it was a horrible experience actually, like working in Word like that.
Yeah. Oh, well, Matthias, thank you so much for being on Terraform Tuesday. If people want to follow you in particular, just give us your blog and any social media presence that you have.
Yeah, so my blog is Matias.engineer, and yes, that's a valid top level domain .engineer. But you can also find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm the most active. Yeah, so my blog or my LinkedIn.
All right, sounds great. Matthias, thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Matthias for appearing on Terraform Tuesday. And hey, thanks to you for watching. He has said that he's going to provide a coupon link for those who watch, and that should be down in the description. So definitely check that out. Pick up his book if you're planning to sit the exam. I've read it and it's excellent. Until next time, keep calm and terraform on.